So you'll remember in May that the British ICC prosecutor, who was democratically elected and nominated by the UK, Karim Khan, filed an application for arrest warrants for the Israeli senior leadership and Hamas senior leadership too for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Well, obviously, he's become very frustrated as he's urged the court to hurry up in its decision, as he's called for the ICC to hurry up. Any unjustified delay in these proceedings detrimentally affects the rights and victims, he said. It is settled law that the court has jurisdiction in this situation. Dismissing legal arguments based on provisions in the Oslo Accords and the assertions by Israel that it is carrying out its own investigations into the alleged war crimes. We know in the past that the US and Israel have interfered with the ICC, with the Trump administration actually sanctioning the previous ICC prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda. Bensouda also reported that Israeli officials have turned up at her home, even followed her to hotels, spied on her and the cases she's working on to try and subvert the ICC and its processes. Well, we know the reasons why Karim Khan is becoming so impatient. He's fed up of the interference too, the phony legal challenges from Germany, Hungary, and the USA. They're trying to argue that the ICC does not have jurisdiction, even though, as Karim Khan pointed out, it's already settled law. So, in the meantime, more and more Palestinians will suffer. Curtis, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, as you correctly pointed out, there's been a lot of intimidation from these figures, and Karim Khan will obviously face the same. Now, he's completely correct when he says that the ICC has jurisdiction, right? Of course, the ICC and the ICJ, International Court, have jurisdiction, but you can't apply international law to nations if they don't, which is really funny because Israel and the US say they have no jurisdiction, which I mean, the US talking about international law. I mean, I think they should probably sit this one out as they have broken almost every law imaginable, destabilizing nations, disposing of elected governments. I mean, the list is endless. You also brought up about Trump intervening and working with other officials in Israel, trying to intimidate other figures. It's quite a dangerous, precarious position to be in, and I think that Khan is a very brave individual. Well, he's doing his job, but he's a very brave individual. Now, essentially, I mean, if you deny justice, or if you delay justice, then justice isn't really being served, is it? So it's clear that these delays are essentially a ploy to try and get out of accountability. Now, it's also very funny that Israel says, well, we don't need the ICC or the ICJ because they conduct their own investigations. So we don't need these international courts. I mean, that's just completely unhinged. I mean, investigating yourself for your own crimes. I mean, I don't see an issue there. I've even heard some of the worst arguments I've heard against the ICC and ICJ is that they are pro Hamas and anti Semitic because they don't want Jewish people to have a sovereign nation. I have actually heard people say that. But what these people need to remember is that the ICJ has said that Hamas leaders committed war crimes, and the ICC also wants to issue arrest warrants to them too. So they're not just picking one side here, even though, of course, Israel is the bad guy in all of this. The ICC and the ICJ are being quite balanced, and yet they're being accused of bias. There's also nothing progressive about an ethno state either.
What's also interesting as well, when you were talking about Israel investigating itself. So this is actually a loophole in the ICC. So if this is why Israel was actually spying on the previous prosecutor, because if they can spy on her and figure out specifically what she was trying to investigate, and
Mm.
if they investigate themselves, technically they can say they have jurisdiction over that, and the ICC don't, because the ICC are supposed to only go after things that are not being investigated by a country that supposedly perpetrated some crime. So they're actually spying on her so they can just do fake investigations into themselves. And then they're just like, oh yeah, we're sorting this out ourselves. It's just a continued subversion of, democracy, of the judiciary, of everything. And it's just an absolute shame that this is now just taking so long. How many months are we at now? May, June, July, August. We're 4 to 5 months into
Mm,
this now. They've had
mm.
more than enough time to issue these arrest warrants, but there's obviously stuff going on in the background that I'm guessing Karim Khan just can't quite say, which is why he's come out with this like very generic message of like, oh, please hurry up, because he will have access. He will be privy to knowledge about all the petitions that are going on in the background, the politicking that's going on in the background. And I'm sure what he's doing by doing this is hinting that, by the way, this is being delayed and this needs to hurry up.
Well, I mean, it's important to note that obviously they might try and find a legal loophole for this, but it's clearly showing people that they're guilty. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to do this. Now, of course, that's when we should step in and other people need to step in and look at any loopholes that Israel can exploit. But the fact that they're doing this clearly shows that they know they're guilty. They know they're complicit in war crimes. In terms of the delay, again, I want to say that it's not. I mean, the message people will try and say is, well, there's going to be a delay because we're trying to carefully look over all the evidence. But that's not the case. I mean, we can see the evidence for ourselves. I mean, essentially, this genocide has been live streamed. It's the most covered genocide in history, and everybody knows what's going on. I mean, there was a grace period, shall I say, after 3 months. No, sorry, after a couple of weeks to a couple of months after October 7th, where people who aren't that politically engaged would have thought, I understand why Israel had to defend itself because there was a terrorist attack. But as the months drew on, as the killing piled up, and now there's a conservative estimate of 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, people understand that what Israel's doing is completely wrong. And it's a failure of our legal systems because even though it's absolutely right that the ICC should issue arrest warrants to Benjamin Netanyahu and other figures, and the ICJ have given a verdict saying what Israel's doing is illegal, it's still not being really enforced all that much. And this delay is part of it. There are people within these legal institutions who obviously support Israel and want to try and essentially stop Israel and, let's be honest, the West, who are complicit in all of this, from facing accountability.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't actually include it in the news today, but it was just reported very recently that the most senior EU diplomat is wanting to sanction some of these Israeli ministers, some of the most senior ones as well. I think it's specifically Smotrich and Ben Gvir, because of their what they're doing with what they're doing to promote the settler violence in the West Bank. But I find that really interesting because when you're talking about the genocide, you're talking about the ICJ, you're talking about the apartheid that has now been, adjudicated. Where's the sanctions for that? Where's
Mm.
where's the backlash? We haven't seen anything from it at all. Obviously, we've seen some governments maybe perhaps distance themselves a little bit, but literally the ICJ said this is apartheid. So where's the sanctions for that? It simply makes no sense. So what's going to happen if these arrest warrants actually do come through? What are we going to do then? We're going to have three Israeli senior leaders who have an ICC arrest warrant out for them. They can't go to about 130 countries around the world. Is that it? Does it just stop there? There's going to be nothing else? Are we actually going to get sanctions from the UK? Because I don't think that's ever going to happen. And obviously, we know the US, especially after Kamala Harris's speech the other day, and obviously we know Trump, they're just going to back them to the end. So what's going to happen when these arrest warrants finally come through, which obviously we hope that they do?
Well, I just want to quickly touch upon Ben Gvir and Smotrich. I mean, these are two awful, despicable people. I mean, Smotrich said that starving 2 million Gazans was justified. Ben Gvir has supported cutting off aid and supplies to Palestinians. So to talk about the EU and the sanctions, it is good to see the EU calling for sanctions against some of the most horrendous people. The problem is a wider issue, right? These two people are a byproduct of Israel. You have to attack the system of apartheid and settler colonialism rather than just individualizing the issue. And that's the liberal framework, which is to be opposed to Lukid and opposed to Netanyahu and certain far right figures, but replacing them with a more moderate set of political figures doesn't change the fact that Israel is a settler colonial state, and they will continue to treat the Palestinians the same way they've been treating them for 75 years, and it doesn't fundamentally change the structure in place, which is that Israel is a colonialist project completely backed by the West, and changing the guard will simply mean the genocide happens slower. Now, in terms of what the fallout would be in terms of the ICC issuing arrest warrants, unfortunately, not much. We've seen after 40,000 Palestinian people being killed, an estimate of 50% of them are children. We've seen schools, hospitals being bombed. We've all seen the images, right? And that hasn't swayed the UK's role in all of this. It hasn't swayed the US, who have a much bigger voice in all this. Hasn't swayed them at all. So the idea that these arrest warrants would change much, I fear it won't. One of the positive things, though, and I don't usually praise the Labour Party. They've been pretty awful on this, but when they
Mhm.
were elected, at least they were signalling that they would respect the ICC's decision. Now they've flip flopped a bunch of times on this. Not surprising because Keir Starmer and David Lamb in the front bench are serial flip floppers, but they did at least say, well, we may, because they want to be the adults in the room here, right? They want to be these sort of international statespeople. And it would be very hard to do that, especially if you're attacking Rishi Sunak when he talks about um, the EHRC, to not then abide by the ICJ and the ICC. But the problem is the US will they, and I don't think they will. I mean, they've already said, as you pointed out, that Israel doesn't, the ICJ doesn't have jurisdiction over Israel. There's been pressure and intimidation on prosecutors from the ICC. So, really, not much will change materially. Potentially, though, the message that sends could be quite strong. Obviously, I completely support these arrest warrants being issued, and we should completely amplify this and talk about it all the time. And anyone who has a chance to be platformed in the mainstream media needs to talk about it. But in terms of policy, given how the UK and the US are completely complicit in all of this, I fear not much will change.
Well, I'm going to do something that you normally do to me and push back and say I actually think Labour, are doing the bare minimum.
Mm,
When they withdrew their option to put a legal opinion against the ICC arrest warrants, they could have obviously not only withdrawn, they could have put forward their own legal opinion to either say we think they do have jurisdiction or we think they don't. So we know that they agree that they're not against the ICC obviously investigating because they withdrew, but they could have joined other countries like Spain to say, no, we agree that the ICC do have a jurisdiction over this, and they didn't do that. So I
mm.
think ultimately, if this does get adjudicated on in the future that this is officially a genocide, I would be fair to say that Labour has been complicit in that because instead of they're choosing to stand on the sidelines as opposed to stand up for the Palestinians, right? And I feel like they still could have done more at this point,
Mm. I mean,
given the
I do
situation
want
that
to
they're
say
in.
that I agree it's the bare minimum. And when I say to be fair to Labour, the bar is so low that I was even surprised that they even just in terms of rhetoric, I was surprised that they were even going to say, well, we may back the ICC. On policy, that's a different matter because when it comes down to it, that's where the pressure really happens. And you and I probably would expect Labour to maybe fold on it potentially,
Yeah,
or at the most, maybe they do support the ICC and Netanyahu is somehow pushed out of power. And I don't mean undemocratically from a foreign state, but I mean maybe people don't elect him anymore because the pressure from the international community. But as I said beforehand, doesn't really make much difference because changing of the guard, even to a more moderate person, doesn't make a difference in terms of the wider picture. But yeah, no, obviously this is the utmost bare minimum from the Labour Party, and they should be doing far more. And I would say right now they absolutely are complicit in the genocide.
I'm excited to say that Turn Left has significantly grown this year, and with that, we've managed to produce far more ambitious content, interviewing high profile people. We did a 12-hour live election show. There are multiple people behind Turn Left, but we are still working around our full time work. But we would love it if this was our full time. It means we could dedicate so much more and to bring even more ambitious content. So if you've been here from the beginning, or you've only recently become a viewer, if you like what we do, then you can help us out. Please like and share this video. Make sure you drop a comment. We want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your feedback. And we desperately need more independent media. If you want to see a socialist media alternative thrive, then you could be part of that. So if you can, You could support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month, or any one-off donation. We can use that money to upgrade our equipment, to rent out a proper studio, and to start paying ourselves. This is only the beginning. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.